If you've been diagnosed with cervical cancer against a background or history of clear or reassuring screening, you may be asking yourself whether you have been failed or let down by errors in that screening. Hello, I am Cian O'Carroll, and our team of solicitors here specialises exclusively in medical negligence law. Back in 2018, we had the opportunity here to represent Vicky Phelan and many other women who brought about the CervicalCheck scandal, uncovering huge failures in Irish healthcare. Since then, we have worked with many other women, and one common feature that we've noticed is that people assume now that there is a system in place where, following a diagnosis of cervical cancer, a person's prior screening history is investigated. And like Vicky Phelan, if there was an error made, they find out about that. Vicky had to do her own research, but the assumption is that following her case and her struggle, that information is now provided to women. In fact, since Vicky stood on the steps of the High Court in 2018, the audit has been cancelled. It was the first clinical step that the state took in what can reasonably be regarded as a cynical act. The audit, through which Vicky Phelan discovered the errors that had occurred, was cancelled in May of 2018. And from that time, no other woman would be informed of a failure in her care or in her screening. Since then, almost 3,000 women in Ireland have been diagnosed with cervical cancer, and almost all of those have been denied any reasonable look back at their prior screening. People also assume that errors are no longer occurring in a negligent way through screening in CervicalCheck. That has not been our experience. In fact, that is not the only issue I would take with the conduct of CervicalCheck since the CervicalCheck scandal. Over recent years, we've acted for quite a lot of women who have had negligent failures in their screening since 2018, since the scandal occurred, and since the women of Ireland were reassured by government, the HSE and CervicalCheck that critical improvements had been made. Several of those women over recent years have suffered very serious injury, including loss of life. It's my understanding that none of these have been individually investigated by the screening programme. Indeed, this office has written to government, including on Taoiseach and Taoiseach, asking that these matters be investigated without any steps being taken to date. Many people would then say, well, the Patient Safety Act, surely that brought about remarkable improvements in the amount of information that people receive when there are failures in their care. There have been some improvements there, but as it applies to a screening programme, no. In fact, if an audit were to be resumed within CervicalCheck or any of the other screening programmes, the Patient Safety Act specifies that the outcome of such an audit cannot be linked to a patient's identity, and that patient cannot therefore learn of the outcome of the audit. It would purely be a statistical result. Effectively, the outcome of the Patient Safety Act is that there would never be another Vicky Phelan. There would never be an opportunity for another woman to learn from reading her file that an audit had been conducted that had uncovered failures in her care. And that was ultimately the desired outcome of the state through the Patient Safety Act. So if you are affected and you have questions about the quality of your prior screening, it is open to you to instruct solicitors who can then take up your medical records, instruct experts to consider your prior screening, and give you those answers that you can trust from an independent source.